In spite of its name, Lough Bura is now an island in a sea of Bord-na-Mona workings, with Ferban Power Station puffing away on the horizon. For Saturday's handing over ceremony, the board supplied an old carriage from West Clare Railways to take the conservationists and officials out to the site on tracks which normally carry wagon loads of peat. The 35-acre loch was drained over 30 years ago, but left untouched while the surrounding peat was cut for the power station. Well, that temporary stay has now become permanent. No peat will ever be dug from Lough Bura. Now, the peat depth there is less than in the surrounding bog, but the board denies that it's handing it over to the conservationists simply because of this.
Well, I think that would be a very unfair view, because Bord-na-Mona has already handed over many valuable sites for conservation. For example, I could mention Raheen Moor Bog near Dangan, 400 acres, which we recently gave to the Minister for Forestry and Fisheries. We've also handed over our interest in Pollardstown Fen, Redwood Bog in County Tipperary, and many others. So I don't think there's any danger that it could be suggested that we do it because it hasn't major commercial value.
Lough Bura first began attracting attention about 7 years ago, when a settlement pond was dug on part of the old loch bed. These ponds are used to clean water being drained out of the bog. Well, in the course of digging this one, the remains of an ancient settlement were discovered. Meanwhile, 35 years of being back on the surface was long enough for the loch bed to start producing vegetation again, flora peculiar to this part of County Offaly, and a further reason to conserve the site and to earn Bord-na-Mona the presence and praise of that well-known botanist, David Bellamy.
And I came here 27 years ago and walked from Dublin to the Shannon, right across these bogs, mapping the flora. And here is just one little plant. This is a sedge called Carex panacea, and if you can see, it's got rather nice lime green leaves. Now, this is actually a plant which usually doesn't grow on the tops of the acid bogs until you get to this point, and then that becomes more abundant. And the further west we go, we get more sedge, and we get wonderful things like the black bog rush coming in, you see. So it's all part of a changing continuum of plant information. Very, very important.
But is there anything here that's unique that you wouldn't get on any other bog in Ireland?
It is the combination. Go a little further, go over to Clara Bog, and you have a bog which is totally unique. There's no one like it anywhere else in the world, because it has this large area where water is draining into it from roundabout, and you have unique plant communities. There is no single plant I could say, no, that doesn't grow anywhere else on Earth, but it is the community, it's the structure which is so important.
Clara Bog, a name to make Bord-na-Mona officials flinch, because they've drained half of it. The board finds itself on the horns of a dilemma over these bogs. On the one hand, it's expected to exploit them to the full. On the other, it's told conservation is important, and balancing the two requirements is difficult.
You see, I think the problem with not only with Clara Bog, but other bogs of scientific interest, is that they have a duality of values. They have a major commercial value. They also have scientific and aesthetic values. Now, it's possible to measure the economic values fairly readily, but it's not so easy to quantify the other values. If you forego the economic values of a natural resource, of peat, you must have very good reasons. And while I wouldn't question for a moment that the scientific importance of these bogs is high, nevertheless, people have to put a value on it. And I think the problem in all these cases is reconciling these conflicting demands and coming to a consensus on them.
For a man who ended up in an Australian prison over his opposition to the Franklin River Valley in Tasmania being flooded, David Bellamy is surprisingly mild about the destruction of part of Clara Bog.
That half of Clara Bog which isn't destroyed at the moment is, I believe, of international importance, and I hope perhaps can be saved. But there are immense problems. Do remember, why should I expect the original person who designed the works of Bord-na-Mona to really have known about conservation? Conservation has really only happened in the past few years. It now really is time for the people of Ireland and the government of the EC to act if we believe in conservation, now is the time to act and make sure it works.
When you were in Australia, you took part in a veritable sit-in to save an area there. If Bord na Móna decide to go ahead and drain the other half of Clara Bog, might we see some sort of a sit-in in Ireland?
I don't know that it will be necessary. You are dealing here with a people who have been known that they respect history, they respect natural history. You only got to go back to some of your great writers, such as Lloyd Prager. You have an enormous, wealth of people who believe in the heritage of Ireland. I don't think these things will be destroyed. But if they were, yes, I think you will find that there are more and more voices will be lifted and say, don't let it happen. And I would come back. Yes, I would certainly be one, yeah.
There are discussions going on about it, and it's a question of almost a national view being taken. We are participating in these discussions, and I wouldn't like to preempt them or speculate about the outcome at this point.
But back to Lough Bura, which has definitely been saved and is now the property of the Irish Wildlife Federation. Well, they've got it. What will they do with it?
Well, of course, the intrinsic interest was just getting it and protecting it. That's what we got it for. What we will do with it in the long run, of course, is we'll develop access and we'll use it for educational purposes. We'll get people to come in and see it, and particularly this little developing woodland that's here, and also the fact that we have this extraordinary archaeological site where some of the very first Irishmen ever to arrive here, 9,000 years ago, are actually living on this site, and I think that's terribly important.
And on conservation generally, Dr. Jerry Doyle gave a grim warning of what's happened on the continent.
The Germans in particular, they realised that they didn't take a reasonable and rational approach to the development of peatlands. They completely destroy them, and in areas they have set up nature reserves on cutaway bogs. They've dammed them up with the intention of trying to get them to redevelop into the original peatlands.
Well, we're not in that position yet, and Bord na Móna very forcibly says we never will be.
Because we have had a sound policy on conservation all along. As I've already told you, we have made many important contributions to bogland conservation. In fact, I'd go so far as to say we are the only body in the country who has made positive contributions, or to put it crudely, put our money where our mouth is.
So, the board says it's going ahead with its conservation policy. But as the snow and bitter cold drove all of us to find some sort of shelter, you could be forgiven for wondering how many members of the general public will ever visit Lough Bura, in winter anyway.
It's a bleak sight, no doubt, and particularly today with the snow. But these are part of our national heritage. I think the feeling that you have something of value, that they are as important as Newgrange, even more. You can replace Newgrange. You can't replace this sort of thing. And I think that sort of idea is spreading through the community, and I think we will get people to come, yes.